Hello there, welcome to the Strange and Deadly Show, brought to you by Gentleman's Grindhouse Records. On this show we discuss films on the Section 3 list related to the video nasties, of course. We pair up our films every fortnight based on a theme. You can find out more information about all of our podcasts over at gentlemansgrindhouserecords.com and subscribe on iTunes and via any podcatcher you might be using. We'll give you that information again and also tell you how you can get your feedback and comments over to us at the end of the show. Well, here we are once again, finally back on schedule, I think. My name is Chris Clayton and I'm joined by...
Tom Elliott.
Tom, how have you been, my friend?
I've been very well, thank you. Not too bad, just taking over, How about you?
Well, that's how we like you the best, Tom. Yeah, I've been okay, trying to make my way in the world. Taking a break from all your worries sure would hurt a lot. I've just gone into the Cheers theme for some reason. Not sure why I've done that. Tom, interesting show this week.
Yes, very interesting. When we closed out last show, we kind of thought it's sort of similar to that one in its theme, but looking at these two movies, it's not entirely so. And I'm guessing one of these films could have quite easily been paired up with something else, but they fit okay to fit in with our theme of rural horror, I think.
Yeah, it's very much a continuation of what we were doing on the last episode, the backwards horror theme. And like you say, bit of a difficult fit in some ways, but also I think it fits, like you say, reasonably okay. I basically just parroted what you said, Tom. I don't know why I bothered. Two very interesting films this week, Tom. Shall I tell you about one of them?
I would love that.
Well, let me tell you about a little film called Invasion of the Blood Farmers. Now, before I tell you about it, I have to thank Mr. Thunder Mike. That's Thunder_Mike on Twitter, who is a listener of ours. He helped us find this film, basically supplied the copy that we ended up watching. It's kind of a difficult film to find if you live in the UK, so he furnished us with a copy of that, and I thank him very much for that, I guess. Thank you very much, Thunder Mike. So Invasion of the Blood Farmers, released in 1972, directed by Ed Adlam, and written by Ed Adlam and Ed Kelleher, I believe that's how that's pronounced. Let me read you the synopsis of this one. Now, let me just say this, folks. Everything that I'm about to read you is going to sound ridiculous, and that's because it is ridiculous. And I promise you, none of this is something that we've made up. This is genuinely the plot of the movie. So we learn in the opening sequence that an ancient band of druids, known as the Sangroids, have been sacrificing people under the full moon and draining and drinking their blood. They're hiding out in Jefferson Valley, a more rural location in upstate New York. Didn't think when I was watching it that it resembled New York at all. Well, there we go. The first hints of a genuine problem in the area are when a blood-soaked man named Jim Carrey, yes, really, staggers and stumbles into a local bar and proceeds to drop to the floor dead. Dr. Roy Anderson, played by Norman Kelly, and his assistant Don, played by Bruce Detrick, decide to test Jim's blood and discover that it grows at an astonishing rate. Their experiments are talked about by the local townspeople and overheard by two members of the Druid cult. Don is dating Roy's daughter Jenny. They all live locally to the Druid cult. The cult takes an interest in Anderson and wishes to scupper his experiments on the blood. So Egon, yes, Egon, we're not talking about Ghostbusters now, but his name is Egon. They pronounce it Aegon in the movie. So Egon ventures out to spy on their house. He's later attacked by Jenny's dog, who he bashes to death, dropping a special artifact in the process, a key. He then hangs the corpse of the dog outside the house, which Jenny discovers in horror. Don investigates the area where the dog was killed and discovers the dropped artifact, bringing it back to the doctor for analysis. Roy can't make any sense of it, so he calls in an old colleague who, as it turns out, is secretly a member of the Druid cult, known as Sontag. Unbeknownst to Roy, here's when it gets ridiculous, folks. The key is actually an important artifact for the Druids and their leader, Creton. He wants it back. So Sontag meets with Anderson under friendly circumstances and offers to take the key away to study it. The experiments continue while the cult kidnaps more people, draining their blood until they die. Sontag returns for another meeting with Anderson and looks at his lab, noticing the progress of the experiments. And now feeling that Roy knows too much, Sontag returns to Creton and states that Roy and his family must be taken care of as soon as possible. With Roy and his daughter now kidnapped, the goal of the cult is revealed. Creton and his associates wish to drain the blood of any human and find one whose blood does not react to the metal of the key. Once they do, they will use that person's blood to resurrect their queen, Onhorid, or Onhorid. It seems that Jenny is just the person they're looking for. Now it's up to Don to track down the cult and dispatch of them before they cut Jenny open and give life to their evil druid queen.
Where have you two been? Never mind. Come down to the lab. You won't believe what's happening.
That sample of Carrie's blood, it's undergone the most incredible transformation. It continues to remain in an unstable state and has been reproducing at a rate unlike any I've seen in 40 years of study.
You know, it does look like a little more than what I brought in last night.
Take the cover off that beaker. There is the sample.
Then what is this?
The merest fragment of what was left in the original test tube after I emptied it into the beaker. That, too, has been reproducing.
But what you're saying isn't possible.
I couldn't agree with you more, but there's the proof right before your eyes. It does give us a strong indication of what caused Carrie's death, but for the life of me, I can't imagine what he could have been exposed to that could create such an unnatural condition.
What you're saying is that his hemostatic balance was so disturbed that
he blew himself to pieces. Obviously, there is some outside agent which has acted upon his blood cells, accelerating their standard growth pattern up into a wild rate.
I don't like the looks of this.
This will either be a major milestone in pathology or a major disaster to mankind. Don, let's work all night if we have to until we nail this thing down.
All right. I'm with you.
So, Tom, Invasion of the Bloody Blood Farmers. What did you think of this one?
You know, way back when I saw Tim Burton's Ed Wood, I really loved that movie. And I thought, you know, I'll have a little dig into Ed Wood's movies. And obviously Plan 9 from Outer Space, Bride of the Monster. There's another one that I can't remember the name of, but they form a kind of trilogy that, you know, few people know this who aren't fans, but there's a trilogy of Ed Wood movies there that are linked by the character of Kelton the Cop and, you know, various other bits and pieces. So, you know, Plan 9 doesn't stand on its own anyway. So I was quite interested in that time at these supposed so bad they're good movies. And,
Yeah.
I mean, this movie, God, it's bad in every way. Let's make no bones about it. It is awful. So the question is, does it fit into that same category as an Ed Wood movie where you can watch it and be amused by it and enjoy it on that level? And for me, I won't say it does in every respect, but I think we are talking Ed Wood caliber of filmmaking here. And there's a lot that I did find very amusing. Not so amusing that I thought it was hilarious, but it was amusing. I wouldn't watch it again, but as a one-time watch, it was quite fun. It was ridiculous. It was crappy, but it was sort of amusing. I'll give it that. How about you?
Yeah, you know, everything about this movie is absolutely god-awful, isn't it? I mean, there's no doubt. We're going to get into it. There's no doubt about it. Every aspect of it is, you know, it's bad all around, and yet I walked away from it with a smile on my face because it just is. You can't quite believe what you're seeing. You can't quite believe the ineptitude of it, and yet the very same ineptitude is what I find sort of so entertaining about it. Unlike a film like GBH, for example, which I also found to be very bad. For me personally, that one just didn't really work for me.
Yeah.
It's always one of those strange things, isn't it? You know, we're sort of contradicting ourselves in to some degree in the way that we view these things. In that I might see a film that's really, really bad, like one of the cannibal ones we reviewed early on. And we might see that and think, well, that's really, really bad. But there's just something about it that doesn't quite work, or maybe it's a bit boring. This, on the other hand, you can't quite take your eyes off it. You know, it's not very long. It's only about 80 minutes long or so. And it just is... you know, I was reading the synopsis there, Tom, and as I was reading it, I couldn't quite believe what I was reading because it just is... It's preposterous in every way. When you get into the actual production of it, there isn't a lot of information that's available about the movie online. You know, I don't have a DVD of it or anything like that, so I can't sort of dig into a commentary to find out every little detail. But when you look at it, you understand why it is the way it is. But as a sort of overview of it, before we get down into the nitty gritty of the quote unquote plot, I think it is inching closer to that so bad it's good. Categorization. I would say it's close to it. I cannot pretend that it's in any way good, and yet I was entertained by it. Tom, what does that say about me?
Well, I think what that says is, and it's quite refreshing in this world, that there's a lack of taking this stuff too bloody seriously. I'm at an age now where I enjoy what I enjoy, and for what it is, and that sometimes doesn't mesh with what other people think. And on this occasion, someone might watch this film and just say that was absolute garbage, and hate it. But and other people will view it as this sort of so bad it's good camp fest, and I'm more veering towards that. Yeah,
me too. And also, every film is different. It's very difficult you can't judge. You can't necessarily judge every film by exactly the same, sort of sequence of. I'm trying to sort of put it in a way that doesn't make me sound like I'm just excusing a really bad movie, but there are certain criteria, and you can't necessarily judge every film by that, because in that way, you can't sort of, just because one movie is bad and you dislike it doesn't mean you then can't like another bad movie.
Well, exactly, because there are films that are much better made than this, infinitely better made, that I just didn't think much of. You know what I mean? So that's just the way it works, isn't it? I think it's, online criticism, of which we are a part, I think often tries to formularize their opinions on things like, well, this is what works in film, this is what doesn't, and it's an ongoing thing. But then I think really all it comes down to at the end of the day is your gut, isn't it? It's like, on the day, what does your gut say? And then we try and sort of formalise that into words, which is what we're doing here for a bit of fun, really. But anyway.
Yeah, well, we'll get into talking a little bit more about that later on, I think. We've got a reason to do that. But going back to this film, it is... The plot of it essentially is... I mean, we've already read the synopsis, really, and it doesn't get... it doesn't really get much clearer than that, I suppose. Is that you've got this band of ancient druids who are the blood farmers, essentially. They're kidnapping people, taking them back to this barn that they've got there. Again, I didn't realise until I was researching the film after I'd seen it that apparently it's set in upstate New York.
Right.
But you wouldn't have thought so. It just seems like such a sort of backwards part of America, but in fact it isn't. And we get the first time I really started laughing is when they kept saying that, old Jim Carrey's out there.
Somebody stop him.
Somebody stop him, Yeah, because that's the first sort of, if you like, the first victim that we see. Jim Carrey has been almost completely drained of blood. I have to say, Tom, I didn't quite get this. I don't know about asking you to try and make sense of this for me, but I didn't quite get this regenerating blood thing. I don't really understand what it had to do with the plot as such. Can you explain that to me?
I'm going to say no, because I really have no clue. But it's funny from the get-go, because they have this opening narration by this very James Mason kind of someone doing a bad James Mason impersonation, and
it's like how the druids in the forest,
and it's like, okay, so fine, and then you have this bar scene with a load of locals sitting drinking. And the first thing that made me laugh is it's sort of like a couple of very static shots of the bar, but then they have close-ups of the barman every now and again, and it's like, okay, we shot this scene now, all right, Jim, we'll just do a couple of close-ups, just laugh or something, or nod your head, and we'll insert it into the footage as if you just reacted to something, but it just doesn't really fit. And it's sort of comical as a result. It's
yeah, I mean, it does get you from the very beginning. I completely forgot to talk about that opening sequence, and that is, immediately you're like, oh dear. And this is one of the things about this film. It's one of the worst things about it, and yet also because of the entertainment value, one of the best things, which is that everybody in this movie, everybody is playing it completely straight.
Yeah.
Everybody is being there's nothing that's meant to be comical in this, but that by its very nature makes it quite comical. So we have the death of old Jim Carrey, and then we meet the the sort of the main family, our heroes of this piece, which of course is Dr. Roy Anderson, played by Norman Kelly, who, according to the I'll put this in my trivia, but I might as well mention it here. He's the sort of batty professor, if you like. Apparently, he was the only actor on this who had some background in acting, having done theatre before. And yet, I think he's legitimately pretty bad in this.
He is. His performance is very much from a school of I will talk quite low at times, and then I will talk like this, and then this. He's just up and down, but whatever he's talking about, it can be something quite mundane, like, so I went to the shops the other day and I bought some bacon and then I came back and had a bacon sandwich, and he's just sort of like that. It's funny.
Bloody hell, you're on fire today, Tom. It's coming in with all the accent, but people are going to be very happy about that. We also meet Don, of course, played by Bruce Detrick. I actually thought of all the actors, the guy who plays Don, I think, was the most assured of all of them.
He was, yeah.
Didn't really have any sort of bad deliveries. Everybody else delivers at least one line that is just delivered really, really terribly. But he was sort of the one who was like, okay. And as it turns out, was sort of the only actor to kind of go on and do some bits and pieces we'll talk about later. But they're there testing this blood, and then they discover that this blood is able to generate itself and grow at an astonishing rate. Again, Tom and I don't know why or what this has to do with the plot at all. We get into talking about the Druid cult a little bit, because I should actually say, of course, they've got that young girl Jenny, terrible actor, but most of them are. And so we meet this cult. And what do you think of this, Tom? What do you think of the concept of this film? These druids who are having to kidnap people and leech their blood. What did you think of the sort of general conceit of the movie?
It's quite simple. These are aliens, alien type vampires, because one of the characters early on, so they wouldn't have to show it on screen, talks about how he saw this spaceship come down, doesn't he? Or am I remembering that wrong? I think he does, doesn't he?
I don't remember that, to be honest, but you might be right.
I do remember him saying that, so I was of the impression that they were sort of like alien druids, but I don't know about you. You just on a slight tangent, but when you read something like Tolkien, and he's created this world, and Tolkien, was an expert in language, so it has a sort of a cohesiveness about it, the elves' language, the names of the elves seem very elvish, the names of the dwarves seem very dwarfish kind of thing, and there's a bit of a cohesion there. And the trouble I have reading fantasy these days is if the writer, and it must be quite difficult for writers, I think, coming up with names for people and stuff, and names for artifacts and places within the mythological world. If that sounds stupid, I really have difficulty getting onto it, because sometimes it's like they've made it up, they have made it up, obviously, but when I was watching this, there's a scene with, like, the head vampire druid guy, Creton, and it just sounds like they're making up names as they go along. I am Creton, and we are of the Sangroid, and we're going to the Black Swag, and just making up stuff as they go along. It is ridiculous.
Yeah, and that guy himself is trying to do a sort of English accent kind of thing. You have to retrieve the key of Megalodon, and you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? I will say though, Tom, it's probably an internet first that you have brought up the name Tolkien with a review of Invasion of the Bloody Blood Farmers. Quite ridiculous. You can tell that they probably scribbled all this stuff down in a day and said, or they did it while they were filming. Your name's going to be Creton, and your name's going to be Sontag, your name's going to be Egon, and here's our queen, Onhorrid. Yeah, I mean, it is. I get what you're saying regarding Tolkien, but I think, but I don't quite know how to process that information at the moment. I think it just is. I don't know, Tom. I don't know what to say, really. This film, it's one of those weird things where Tom and I, we could sit here for another hour telling you all the bad things about this and all the things that, in that way, make it actually quite good and sort of entertaining, in a really awful way. But the proof of the pudding is you finding it and watching it, because it's very difficult for us to really sort of explain to you the vibe and the atmosphere of this and all the little things that are wrong with it. I remember a scene when Dr. Roy Anderson, played by Norman Kelly, is on the phone, and he's in the lab, and then at one point he's on the phone and he says something, and then he immediately looks at the camera as if he doesn't know what he's supposed to say next, and they leave it, and they left it in. And then in the next scene, like, you can tell, like, he's on the phone again in the next scene, but he's looking away at a certain angle where you can tell that he's reading his lines off a cue card. And it's just this, for a supposedly established theatre actor, it's... And then also I don't know if you noticed this as well, Tom, I imagine it would be difficult not to. There are several times where the actors just totally fluff their lines completely, and they just leave it in. They just let them carry on, It is, it's astonishing. We also, of course, I don't know if I did put it in the synopsis here. Of course, we get the character by the name of Sontag, or I can't remember what his name was. He's like an old colleague of Dr. Anderson's. I think his name was... I don't know, Mikowski or something, something like that, who is also a bloody awful actor. That's one thing we need to say to almost everybody in here is really, really terrible, and I mean really terrible. Do you remember the guy who was like he was trying to clean the blood stain up in the bar?
Yeah, it's him who said about the alien ship. That's right, I remember now. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, actually. I think now that you've said that, I can sort of remember that. And his delivery, like, he sounds like he's stoned.
Yeah.
It's it's a remarkable thing, really, because that has got to be the most languid line delivery I've ever heard from anybody. I mean, it's an astonishing thing. The thing is, and not to sort of dig too deep into the trivia already, but we already can gather that almost everybody in here is not a professional actor, has probably never acted before in their life. And they've all been thrown together in this mess of a plot, which, like Tom said, should be quite simple, really, but is just all over the place with it. It feels like they're always making up elements. And yet it's just so bad that you can't take your eyes off it. And I couldn't help but feel when I walked away from it that if I found it in a bargain bin for £2, I would probably, I was explaining the plot and everything and how bad it was to my girlfriend, and she wants to sit and watch it with me now. So, it's perhaps we'll have that effect on you listening at home.
Yeah, I said I wouldn't watch it again, but maybe under the right circumstances I would. There's so many things. We could sit here all night. You talked about the doctor being on the phone before, and I can't remember the name of the character who he calls, but it cuts to the person who he's calling on the phone, and there's a guy sat in a room just staring straight ahead with his hands on his lap, and he sat there for about 3 seconds, and when the phone rings, he immediately picks up the phone.
Yeah, he was just waiting for his moment.
Yeah,
Unbelievable. We haven't talked about the police chief either, Tom. The police chief is you think the acting is bad in this movie. Wait till you, and I've got something to say about the police chief actually a bit later. But the police chief in this is, I think the police chief could be the worst actor I've ever seen in anything. He's up there. I mean, the guy who's cleaning up the blood stain, like you say, the guy who sort of spoke about the aliens, may beat him to the punch on that one. But it's a whole new level of bad acting. It's appalling. But I couldn't stop laughing.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? There's films that are terrible, and you sit there with, and think, God, this is awful, and with a real distaste for it. But I've got kind of goodwill towards it, because it was, they were obviously having a go, doing their best with what they had, and everyone was mucking in. They're all terrible. But they were having a go, and I have got quite a lot of goodwill for it in its ridiculousness.
Sure, and what have I always said on this show? It's you can be awful and boring, and I'm probably not going to like it. But you can be awful and entertaining, and I'll probably give it a pass, you know, because I had a good time with it. And this is one of those things. It reminds me a little bit of Troll 2, which is another film that is just absolutely god awful, and yet it has that sort of weird charm to it where you're sitting and watching it and thinking, I can't quite believe what I'm seeing, and yet I can't sort of look away from it, and I'm not bored by it. And it reminds me of that. I'll put it this way: it's easy for me to understand why it's had a number of DVD releases and a special edition DVD in America, because I can understand why this is a cult movie to some people. Like I say, I'm never going to be. I mean, it'll probably be another couple of years before I sit and watch it. But if I found it again, or I found it in a bargain bin, you know, I think I would probably pick this up and whack it on one day and just think, wow, you know, I mean, I'm probably a shit director. I don't know, I've never directed anything in my life, but I've got to think that even with 10 quid in my pocket, I might be able to do something better than this. But would it be as entertaining? That's the question.
That's the thing, isn't it? I thought exactly the same thing. If me and Chris had some cameras and everything, I think we could at least get to this level of filmmaking. I would like to think so anyway. Hopefully better, but you never know. We might just be that bad. But yeah, it's so... Things are just coming to mind. Like there's a shot where the young character, the main guy, I can't remember his name. I never remember
Don. I think his name is Don, yeah.
He's in the lab talking to the doctor, and the camera sort of pans to him, and the doctor's sat next to him, and you just see the top of the doctor's head, but like not just, you know, a little bit of it, like from his eyebrows up are in shot next to Don. Just thinking about it's making me laugh. I think I might go and watch it after this, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's not kid ourselves. The director of this one, Ed Adlam, never went on to do anything else, and it's understandable because he's not a very good director, and the way it's shot and everything is pretty appalling, and it's badly edited and all the rest of it. But you know, I'm finding it sort of hard to, because there's so much coming to mind. There are so many little moments in this where you just think, wow, this is. You know, any director that's worth his salt would immediately go, nope, chop, 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 this has got to go, this has got to go. Not Ed Adlam, he leaves it all in, right. You know. Everything's in there. I mean, I'm shocked there's not footage in there of the crew, you know, and the cast going to, you know, get some, I'm trying to think of the name of it now, going to the old canteen and getting some food and leaving that in the shot, you know.
Yeah.
It is, and the flubbed lines and,
I guess we should get to the end and, you know, because we could sit here all day, couldn't we? There's really not enough meat to the whole thing to talk about plot lines and you know, individual performances.
Yeah, I feel like I'm repeating myself saying these things, but I mean, what else can you say? It speaks for itself.
Yeah, but there's early on in the film, one of the blood farmers, Sontag, beats a dog to death.
No, actually, his name is Egon.
Oh, that's Egon, is it? Right.
Yeah, Sontag is the guy who masquerades as like a professor who.
Okay. Egon.
Yeah, so that's
Aegon.
Yeah. I don't blame you though, Tom. They could be called anything, couldn't they? Really?
Yeah. So Aegon beats a dog to death in a classic piece of hold a stuffed dog in front of you and beat it with a stick acting. Yeah. And then the kind of end of the film culminates on top of a hill or a mountain where all of these druids gather with the professor, and they're trying to revive this druid queen on Horrid. And it's there, you know, if there's any semblance of cohesion to the whole thing throughout, it really all goes out the window when there's just a static camera shot of the top of this hill, and everyone's just throwing themselves around, aren't they? And, you know, screaming, and the doctor's struggling, and it's the most bizarre thing to watch. If you only watch one scene in a film, watch this, because it's quite a sight to behold, isn't it?
I mean, it's rubbish, but it's quite interesting. And also at this point, you know, Don and the professor have they've created this blood reagent that's supposed to stop the you know, rapid growth of the blood, and the professor at some point just says, you know, and I guess they set this up, you know, the queen comes back to life. They manage to resurrect her, and she's sort of standing up there, a bit zombie-like, and the professor just shouts to Don, you know, use the reagent. And then, and it's a really sort of pivotal moment, because this is how Don's going to stop the druids. And they shoot it from far away, so you don't even really see what he does.
Everyone just falls over.
And then everyone just falls over, and one of them, I don't know, bursts into flames, and then that's the end of it. It's such a bizarre ending. Like, it really got to me, that moment where I guess he sprays the reagent or pours it into the woman's mouth or something like that. But they shoot it from at the same static shot that you were talking about. They shoot it from there, so you don't really get to see what he actually did. Yeah. But yeah, like you said, they then just sort of topple over each other, probably regretting the fact that they ever worked on this in the first place as they're down there. And that's the end of the film. It is, yeah, if you can find that on YouTube or something, if you can find the whole film, I mean, watch it and see how you get on. But if you can find that scene on YouTube, it's an astonishing little ending. It's so badly done, but so funny.
Yeah, but there is one little happy note at the end, which I'm glad to say. The dog, God. Which is why I mentioned it. The dog got beat to death. Does it come back to life? Do they use the reagent on it or something? Is that what they're trying to say?
Yeah, it seems to me that somehow they've managed to... it seems like the dog's been reincarnated somehow, because the dog was huge.
Yeah.
No, it's a big dog. But then when, at the end of it, they use the reagent on the dog's corpse, I guess.
Right.
And
or did they just get another dog? I don't know.
I don't know. I've got a feeling that maybe that's it. But it was so badly... It's such a confusing scene that I thought that they really had used the reagent to bring the dog back to life. But the problem is that when they hand the dog... Well, they don't hand the dog, but when they show the dog on the screen, the dog is now a puppy. Yeah. So, strange. What a strange little shot. But it is a happy moment, isn't it?
It is. It's so happy that our last actual shot is the professor smiling manically into the camera, which is the most frightening thing in the film.
Absolutely. Having tortured us with his horrendous acting. Yeah. Tom, what can we say? Invasion of the Blood Farmers. I mean, I said this on Twitter the other day. It is an experience. It is something. It is something. I don't quite know what it is. You mentioned Plan 9 from Outer Space there, and I mentioned Troll 2. I think those are two, those are two very good examples of what you can compare this to. It's really, really terrible.
Yeah.
And it's really like straight-laced, and everybody's playing it straight in this. None of this is meant to be humorous whatsoever, but that's what gives it its character. It has character. That's what I would say. It has character and intent and purpose, and gets it all really, really badly wrong. But like I said at the beginning of this, I walked away with a smile on my face, Tom, and I can't say more than that, really.
That's it. I don't think I can say any more than that. If you get anything from Ed Wood films or Troll 2 or any of those kind of films, then I think you'll get a kick out of this one. If there are people out there who don't really believe in the whole so bad it's good thing, and if you don't, then steer clear, because it's not for you. But yeah, get the beers in and have a watch of this one. It'll be a good night.
Yeah, and if anybody feels that way, that the so bad it's so good thing doesn't exist, I don't think I want to be around them anyway. They're not my sort of people. Here's the trivia, Tom. Of course, I always read trivia. I'm sure you're dying to know more about the production of this movie. According to IMDb, the film was shot for around $24,000, and many of the actors were... Now, here's where we get to the crux of it. I think we will understand immediately here. Many of the actors were paid with a six-pack of beer. Most of the actors were people who lived locally to director Adlam, were his neighbours, in fact. Aside from Norman Kelly, who we mentioned is... the Dr. Roy Anderson, the professor in this, who was a theatre actor and was friends with co-writer Ed Kelleher. And I presume that he was probably a really good theatre actor, but that doesn't necessarily translate to film work. So it's entirely possible that he got in front of a camera and then froze up. Yeah. Virtually none of the cast and crew went on to any success aside from Bruce Detrick, who plays Don, the young guy, who I think we both agree, Tom, is probably the most assured actor here. I mean, he's not bad.
I agree.
Compared to some of the other people. I'm not saying he's great, but he's not bad. Bruce would go on to success as a composer, musician, teacher and poet. He worked on musicals and theatre shows and had dedicated much of his life to helping kids with AIDS. He sadly passed away in 2001 from cancer. Interestingly, I actually read an IMDb comment from somebody who knew him and had said that apparently he'd spoke to him I guess it was in the 90s, somewhere around there, and Bruce Detrick had actually said that he wishes he could go to any movie store or rental place and burn every copy of Invasion of the Blood Farmers that he could find. So I'm guessing he wasn't a big fan of it. Ed Kelleher, the co-writer, did go on to write a number of other movies, including the famously bad Shriek of the Mutilated, which I think I have a copy of somewhere. I got in an old 30 movie pack or something. That's a Bigfoot related movie. Everything he wrote was really, really bad. Ed Adlam, the director, didn't appear to go on to anything. Now this is interesting. The daughter of the infamously awful Chief Spano, who's the police chief in this, posted a comment on IMDb back in 2006 giving her thoughts on her dad's role and the film itself, and I thought I'd read this comment out now. It provides some insight into the production of the film. I sort of quite enjoyed reading this. So she says, Invasion of the Blood Farmers holds a very special place in my heart since my father played Chief Spano. At various times in my life I've been asked, what is something we don't know about you? I respond with, I'm a movie star's daughter. I know that's stretching it a bit, but my father did star in a movie. I realise that Invasion of the Blood Farmers is not an award-winning movie, but you get what you pay for in life. The Adlams were our next-door neighbours, and my father and other people from the block were recruited to star in the movie. I think that explains the acting, Tom. Yeah. My father worked for the telephone company, so he was not hired for his acting talent. They even they even tried to get my aunt to record her scream for the movie, but she refused. There was not much money spent on making the film. Jenny's house in the movie was the Adlams' home, and going on location meant a 5-minute ride into town. I frequently drive by the motel where my father made a phone call in the movie. The phone booth was taken down a few years ago. This was back in 2006 that she wrote the comment. Given the meagre support it received, the movie exceeds my expectations. I know my father's performance was not Oscar caliber, and I bet you won't find it hard to believe that this was his only film. Although he was on Bowling for Dollars, which I guess is a game show in America. But I really enjoy watching it now. But I enjoy watching it every now and then, not because it has the best special effects or award-winning acting, but because it's simple, kind of like a child's artwork. It may not be a Picasso, but it is a pure reflection of them. Only a few of the actors were professional, most were just playing. No visions of getting discovered. How many films can we say that about these days? Just a few more notes about my dad that you might find interesting. When the movie came out in the theatre, my dad took my brothers and a few neighbourhood kids to see it. They all got in free because the clerk recognised my dad's deep voice from the movie. We always complained to him about the glasses he wore in the movie. They're not his real ones. He told Eddie he didn't want to wear them, but for whatever reason, Eddie wouldn't let him take them off. In the late 80s, my dad found out that he had a fan club in California. 2 friends who liked the movie called out of the blue and told him how much they liked the movie and that they scheduled viewings of it at their college. My dad sent them a signed picture for their Invasion of the Blood Farmers viewings, and they sent my dad an annual birthday card for over 10 years. Our favourite line of my dad's is, "Oh, I think he understands." He's in Jenny's house talking to her father. Finally, give my dad some credit on his last scene. I think he gave an Oscar-caliber performance of dying. So I just thought that was interesting because it sort of gives people some insight into a very obscure and yet sort of strangely beloved cult movie, Tom.
It does. That's a very nice thing, I think. And it just shows that not necessarily we, but sometimes we sit and bitch about movies and stuff like that. And this is a very, the real people just trying to get together and do something. I don't think, people might not like it, but I don't see how anyone could really have any bad will towards it. And I think that note shows that. Yeah,
definitely. Now, the film is easier to find in the US, where it has had a number of DVD releases, the latest and most feature-packed being the 2013 release from Code Red. This edition includes special features like an audio commentary with director Ed Adlam, and also includes another film. I think this is another infamously bad one, Silent Night, Bloody Night, included as part of a double feature. These are also there are also other DVD releases from Retro Media and Cheesy Films. All of these are locked to Region 1. Can't seem to find a DVD release here in the UK for this one. And I very much doubt they're going to transfer it to Blu-ray anytime soon. It would be a bit of a miracle if they did. But yeah, if you want to get the film, I guess if you've got a multi-region DVD player, import it in from America. And I wouldn't, don't spend too much money on it just because Tom and I are saying that we like this one. I don't think either of us would spend over £2 for it.
No. I would like to hear that commentary though.
So would I actually. I'm sort of, quite curious. I can't seem to find the Code Red edition anywhere, so I wonder if it's out of print now.
Yeah.
It probably isn't a great demand for the movie, but yeah, there you go. Invasion of the Blood Farmers. Really, 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 really terrible. And yet Tom and I sort of enjoyed it.
Yes, we did. And now we're going to move on to another backwards movie in the shape of Midnight. So shall I tell us a few things about that one?
Please tell us a few things about Midnight, Tom.
I will. It's also known as Backwoods Massacre and John Russo's Midnight. It was released in 1982 and written and directed by John A. Russo, and we'll talk a bit about him later on. We open on a young girl caught by a bear trap, crying out in agony. She's found by a family of young Satanists led by their sadistic mother, who has indoctrinated them into her way of thinking. They proceed to knock out and then later kill the young girl in a satanic ritual. We flash forward for many years later and meet Nancy, played by Melanie Verlin, a very religious teenage girl who's at church confessing her sins. She's asking forgiveness for having committed carnal activities with a former boyfriend, and she returns home absolved. Nancy's life at home isn't all it could be thanks to her lecherous stepfather Bert, played by Lawrence Tierney, who arrives home from his police job and proceeds to come on to Nancy in his drunken state. She resists continually until he forces himself upon her, and she has no choice but to knock him out. Feeling there's no other choice, she packs her clothes and decides to run away from home, flagging for a ride out on the streets. It's here that she meets Hank and Tom, two former students who are on a road trip to Florida and are stealing food from grocery shops along the way. Nancy decides to join them on the trip, despite Hank insisting that she might be trouble. The three journey off and reach the backwoods south, where they stop at a gas station and meet a friendly black preacher and his daughter. Racism is rife here, with Hank having been subject to it himself. They give the preacher and the girl a lift to a local cemetery and carry on. It's here that we see the first signs of something being very, very wrong in the area, as the preacher and his daughter are stalked and killed by a laughing maniac. Nancy, Hank and Tom continue on their way and make their biggest mistake. They're tracked by the cops after stealing more groceries. Driving off into a wooded area, they almost run over the maniac, who is carrying something concealed by a sheet. We know it to be the body of the preacher's daughter. Though feeling suspicious, the three still decide to camp out nearby for the night, unaware that the now grown-up satanic family lives locally, of which the laughing maniac is a member. Nancy goes off to explore in the early morning, leaving Hank and Tom asleep. Sadly, their doom approaches in the form of two supposed cops, who arrest, then execute them. As it turns out, it's two members of the family, Abraham and Luke, the former played by Romero regular John Amplis. Spotting Nancy, who is hiding in the bushes, they give chase and eventually catch her, taking her back to their house, where they throw her into a cage. She's there with another young girl, also caged. It transpires that the family, comprised of the aforementioned Abraham and Luke, alongside their laughing brother Cyrus and sister Cynthia, are kidnapping young girls and killing them as part of a satanic ritual, using their blood to feed and hopefully resurrect the corpse of their dead mother. There's sort of links there, I guess. Can Nancy find a way to escape the family? All hope seems lost as she prays helplessly in her cage, but perhaps her stepfather, who is concerned for their safety, is the one who might just come to her rescue.
Pardon me, young man, is that your band?
No, it's not mine. It's my friend's.
I'm Reverend Carrington, pastor of the First Baptist Church. This is my daughter Sandra, home from college for the holiday.
The bus from Perryville let us off at the crossroads. It's still a long way home for us if we walk it, 10 miles.
What are you majoring in, Sandra?
Education.
You gonna be a teacher, huh?
I hope so.
You seem to be headed in our direction. Do you mind if we ride with you a short piece?
Believe me, I hate to be so forward. You two fellas are strangers and don't owe us anything. Truth is, I don't mind walking 10 miles, but I'm scared to be out all alone on those back roads with my daughter. It's too dangerous.
There's been a half a dozen people found dead around here just in the past couple of years since I came here to preach. Some look like accidents, some obviously murdered. A man and wife in my own congregation was found burnt to death in their cottage.
The sheriff ruled accident, but that don't explain why a half-empty can of gasoline was found back in the woods. Some of the lawmen around here don't feel too particularly about anybody who isn't white.
Watch your mouth, preacher. I'll be $20. Your tank was burned dry.
Real friendly guy, ain't he?
Will you let us ride with you?
Sure, it's no problem. Maybe you can point out a good place for us to make camp.
Lord have mercy if you decide to camp out around here. Didn't you hear me say some people have been murdered? Why don't you let me put you up at our place?
We're much obliged, sir, but we'd rather camp out under the stars.
So, Chris, Midnight, what do you think of this one?
Well, this is interesting, isn't it? It is a film that is, as you said, written and directed by John A. Russo. Now, John A. Russo is kind of an important person, at least in one example anyway, in that he co-wrote Night of the Living Dead with George A. Romero. And so he has had a hand in something that is, something of a masterpiece in horror history, I would say. Midnight is a film that is a bit better made than Invasion of the Blood Farmers, but I don't think it's much better made. But it's nowhere. It's not as bad as Invasion of the Blood Farmers by any means. No. But John A. Russo, to me, is not a very good director. I don't think he's ever made anything good. I think he's done some stuff that's pretty heinous, actually, in terms of directing, and I'll tell you what that is later on. I think some of you probably already have an inkling. I thought that this was boring. Really, really boring. Tom, this is the second time you bought this movie, isn't it?
It is.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I used to buy all the Arrow stuff early on, but then there's just too much to get. And I started watching this, and I actually turned it off about half an hour in, and put it on eBay.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. I think, and that the first half an hour of it is some of the most boring stuff in it. I think it gets, it picks up a little bit towards the end. It just is. So I think some of the musical choices in the beginning are really misjudged.
Yeah. Quite
badly done. I think that, I mean, let's talk about one of the early scenes here, really, which is with Nancy, where she's, nearly raped by her stepfather. And it would be quite a harrowing scene if it wasn't for the fact that this bouncy pop music is playing in the background. Yeah. Do, 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 do. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ, And then there's also this song that plays through the whole thing. I can't actually remember the words of it now. What you only just watched it a little while ago, Tom. What are the words of that song again? Because it was driving me nuts.
I can't remember, to be honest, mate. I know what you mean. It is quite frequent, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like, you're lost and alone, you're never going to go home again. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ, no, concessions towards trying to, have any atmosphere here whatsoever. And it lumbers along, and occasionally something interesting might happen. Some very, very weird decisions in this. I have to say that I was, I left it feeling thoroughly unimpressed, really.
Strangely, considering I got rid of it half an hour in last time, I enjoyed it a bit more this time. But it seems to be more that it was sort of punctuated with some things that I think were actually quite good throughout it. And so it'd make me perk up and go, oh, hello. And then it just sort of peter off and just muddle along again. Characters come and go without really having much of an impact on anything. There's this trip that Nancy takes with these two guys, and the detail involved in it is not really necessary, because all it does is hold up the film. Scenes of them steal. I understand that was needed to set up certain things, but just there's a lot of stuff in it where it really could have just been streamlined. And I know movies of the time tended to be a bit more slower paced, and I get that, but you're right, it really takes an hour before it starts to pick up pace, and I think the ending is okay. That last half hour's all right, but like I say, I'll get into the bits that I really liked as we go on, but I liked it a bit better than you. But yeah, it's a bit of a slog for that first hour.
Yeah, I just don't think John Russo is a particularly good director, and never has been. And I think a lot of the problems with this come from that. The fact that this was based on his novel. You would imagine that. Apparently the novel is really badly written as well. Like, I haven't actually read it myself, but apparently it just is. He's the. I think John Russo is one of those guys, and there are a lot of them who happen to get happened to be very lucky with one particular thing, which was Night of the Living Dead. And even then, I think that the genius of that film comes from the Romero half rather than Russo's. Not trying to be too down on him, but I just think that he's not a capable enough director to have turned this into something that's good. Like you say, there are bits and pieces where you think, okay, this is kind of okay. And I didn't put this in the trivia, actually, I forgot to do it, but Tom Savini did some of the makeup effects on this.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of... Now, I don't think that anything in here is anywhere near some of the best stuff he's done, but there are a couple of moments here, some slit throats later on in the movie, which I'm sure you were going to bring up as well, which are, you sort of think, okay, that's got kind of the smell and the feel of something that Savini might do. I think there's a lot of, like you were saying, there's a lot of superfluous fluff in here that I think if they could just get rid of that, we've got these two guys, Tom and Hank, in there, never really developed. I mean, all we really learn about them is that, the one guy is, pretty much wants to get into Nancy's pants and the other guy doesn't like her. And that's, sort of all we really learn about them. They're really just kind of, bait, really, at the end of the day. And there's some very strange decisions in this. I mean, let's talk for a little bit about the character of Nancy and her stepfather, which is played by Lawrence Tierney. How do you feel about that sort of dynamic there? There's something that's very unsettling about that, which I feel that the film, unfortunately, due to the, like I said, the musical choices, I think it gets the atmosphere and the ambience of that quite wrong.
It's a very there's some very strange choices with regards to these two, because like you said, early on, there is this scene set to tinkly pop music where he's drunk and he tries to force himself on her. Now, Lawrence Tierney, we've seen him in other things, Reservoir Dogs always springs to mind for me with him. Mm-hmm. He's a man who looks like he was carved out of granite, If back in the day, if they'd have made a Fantastic Four movie, he could have been the Thing.
Absolutely.
He's got that sort of way about him, and his voice would have been perfect. So he's quite an imposing figure. He's a bit lumbery because he's very heavy, But so to have him force himself on this young girl is not particularly pleasant. But like you say, it could have been played so much more danger to it, whatever, I don't know. But the strange thing is, then we get a couple of scenes throughout the movie where he after she's gone missing, he tries to say to his wife, she's trying to force herself on me, and those scenes tend to just drag things down. And then later on, he actually goes looking for her to try and save her. So it's this very strange arc that this character has.
Yeah.
It just doesn't really make any sense. And okay, she had to have a reason to run away, and he is that reason. But then later on, he's trying to save her. It's just very odd. It just doesn't sit right together, I don't think.
No, it doesn't quite connect all the way. And also, like you say, I mean, those scenes where he's talking to his wife and sort of trying to pin the blame on Nancy. The first half of this movie, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of scenes of people just talking about things, and it just needed to be pushed along a little bit. I also feel like I thought it would have been quite a good twist if it turned out that, because obviously he doesn't want his wife to know that he's been pushing himself on Nancy. I thought it would have been quite a good twist if he'd gone out there, discovered that she was taken by the family, and then left her there to die. Yeah. That was originally, I sort of thought this could be kind of a cool twist if that's what happened, because of course he's we're sort of getting into the latter half of the movie by saying this, but I just wanted to try and connect it back to that early point of he doesn't want to get caught by his wife having played around with her daughter. I thought it would be interesting if he's out there, he's listening to Abraham and Luke talking about what they're going to do to the girls that they've kidnapped. I thought it would have been quite interesting if he'd been like, okay, this is my way to get her to shut up. No one will ever know what I did if he just left her there to die. But he doesn't. He sort of has this quite interesting thing. That doesn't mean I forgive him for what he did,
no.
Because it's still, he's a lecherous, sleazy old man. But it is interesting that he is the only one really at the end of it who has the ability to somehow rescue her from this horrible fate that she's found herself in. It's a very interesting character he plays, and Lawrence Tierney, I think, is by far the it seems strange to say it given his character's sort of so despicable early on, but I think he's by far the best actor in this.
Kind of along the same lines as you, a more sophisticated writer obviously she had to have a reason to go, so they set him up as this despicable, booze swilling rapist guy, and then he doesn't really redeem himself as such. He tries to, but it never really explores why he's so concerned about it. It's that's why it doesn't fit. So I think a more sophisticated writer could maybe have just had their relationship as, a step-parent, stepchild relationship can be quite difficult at times, because that's just the nature of it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that either of them are at fault. It's just they're put in a slightly strange situation that is difficult to deal with on both of their parts, and they could have used that as some sort of jumping off point for her to leave, and that would have made him a bit more of a character to root for when he goes to try and find her.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm skipping ahead too much, and of course we'll come back, but she obviously leaves because of him. And what's interesting to me is that at the end of the movie, now spoiler here, folks, Lawrence Turney's character, Bert, I think his name is, he dies. And she doesn't really seem that upset about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, she doesn't seem to be, it's almost as if not only has he, he's come there to rescue her, not only has she managed to get rid of this, sort of terrible sadistic family that have kidnapped her, but she also has managed to get rid of a man who she doesn't like very much either. I never sort of got the sense that she was all that upset that he would die at the end of it.
It's not even that she's not upset, it's just an absence of any reaction. There's not a reaction of, well, he was a bastard, but he didn't deserve to die that way, or, there's just nothing.
No, that's right. Now, I have to say, the girl who plays Nancy, Melanie Verlin, I didn't think she was bad. I think she has bad moments. Certainly not a very accomplished actor by any means. I think she only did one movie after this, which was Monkey Shines, which is a Romero movie. I have not seen Monkey Shines for a very long time, so I don't remember in it, or if she played a big part or anything like that. But she might be the lead in it. I don't know. I can't remember. But not a particularly great actor. I mean, what do you think?
I thought she was okay as a kind of central character to the whole thing. I thought she was all right. That's the best I can say, really. And I think, to maybe try and pepper this with the other side of things. I mean, is there anything you did like about it? Anything that raised it above that sort of mediocrity that was throughout?
I mean, like I said, a couple of very decent, not particularly, not super gory, but decent Savini effects. I think the key scene, I would say, in the middle of it, of course, is when Tom and Hank are out there camping. Nancy's gone off for a walk in the woods, comes back, and hides in the bushes because she hears that something's going on out there. And there are two people out there who at first we think are cops. And one of them is played by John Amplas, who, of course, you'll remember for being Martin in the Romero film with the same name, and who I think is decent in this, playing a very different character to Martin. A really sort of spiteful, nasty guy. I thought this was an interesting thing. I like this scene, even though I'm not entirely sure that what's happening really makes that much sense. There's nothing about these guys that seems particularly police-like to me. Certainly their behaviour. I always wondered why Hank bothered to run off at all. Because he meets a very violent end, being shot in the back a couple of times. Basically, these two guys, as we learn, they're not actually cops. They're members of the satanic family who killed. There were real cops who were actually tracking the van, because these three, of course, stole a bunch of groceries and then took off. They were tracking the van. They somehow ended up crashing somewhere. They ended up being killed by the family, and then, of course, these two guys took their uniforms. And then we have one of the strangest moments here, which is that after Nancy has witnessed these two members of the family killing Tom and Hank, they don't know that she's there. She could have stayed in the bushes until they were gone. But for some reason, she decides to jump out and scream, and then immediately they're alert to her presence and she has to run off. Very, very strange decision. There's some strange decisions in this, but you asked me what I liked about it. Not a lot, really, I guess, on reflection of it, A couple of little bits, For some reason, I kind of fancied the evil sister in this, Cynthia. I don't know why, but I just got a thing for black-haired women. Maybe, I don't know. But it is, I don't know. Tom, what did you like about it?
I thought the opening credits was done quite well. this quite ominous music. We've had this
Yes.
satanic start, and then this girl in confession. That sort of juxtaposition of those two things I thought was really quite effective, and it actually made me think, oh hello, maybe I've remembered this, because I think satanic movies have an energy all of their own, and I'm not a religious man, but there's just something about them that maybe gives me a bit more pause than just a straight up horror movie, that religious aspect. But then unfortunately it just gets dropped for a lot of the film, and I think when it comes back, I quite welcome it. I just wish the satanic aspect of it had been woven throughout in a way, so I don't remember this as a satanic movie, but that's the kind of whole basis of it, and when it is done, I think it's done quite well, but it's just used so little that it just doesn't stick in my mind as what the movie is about. So it's a shame, really, that it's done well, I think, but a bit wasted. Because later on we have a scene where Nancy is stuck in a cage, and we have them doing their satanic mass, and she's reciting prayers, as they're reciting their satanic chants or prayers or whatever. And again, I thought that's quite nicely done. That sort of, the two sides chanting or praying to their god or Satan or whatever, and these things I think were done quite well.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen a bit more of that, and maybe the God versus Satan angle of it. But it's only really, the character of Cynthia, the sort of evil sister, she is speaking with Nancy when she's in the cage at one point, just about, why do you believe in God? A God that would allow you to undergo the suffering that we're putting you under, essentially. And I would have liked that to have played out a bit more.
Yeah.
I think the interplay, the juxtaposition of, sort of good versus evil. I think you were talking about the opening credits there. I'd kind of forgotten about that, but yes, I do agree with you. She's sort of there off in the bottom left corner, confessing, and then the credits are running on the right hand side, and I thought that was actually quite inspired. Not something we see from John Russo very often, really, especially not if you look at some of the more recent stuff he's done, which is pretty woeful. They're decent. You're right. There are a couple of little decent bits in here. I just think so much of it is boring, Tom, that I've really struggled to make my way through it. And I think I like some of the ending towards it. I would have liked to see them maybe run around the house a bit more. We really don't see very much of the house. I thought it would have been quite cool if, because they bring. When the character of Bert, the stepfather, arrives at the house and asks the brothers to bring Nancy out of the house for him, nothing you never ever see inside that house again. I thought it would have been kind of cool if he'd gone in there and we'd got to see more of the sort of depravities that are going on in there, or maybe arrived in the middle of the ritual, something that would have spiced it up a bit more. But there are a couple of decent bits. This is probably John Russo's best movie, and that, which I know is for me, probably sounds like I'm damning it with faint praise because I don't like his stuff very much. But I definitely think you like this a bit more than me, Tom. Also, you had seen it before, so in many ways it was sort of, I never had. So in many ways it was you sort of trying to see, okay, giving this another go and see if I can make it through it, and I can see why you like bits of it. For me, this is one that I wouldn't watch again. We talk about a bad movie. I think this is just quite mediocre.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think as well, just touching on our subject, the rural horror aspect of it, I like the location. Very different from the ones on our last episode, the desert and the Texas landscape. This was a lot greener, but maybe it was the way it was filmed. It looked very foreboding and drab. It always looked like it had just stopped raining or something. Quite a damp atmosphere to the whole thing, and I kind of like that. I love America, and I like the different aspect of the country. So it as well, the buildings, everything being so used. It's the kind of place where if there's a hole in a door, you don't get a new door. You just nail the board over the hole in the door and just leave it there, And that whole lived-in aspect of it, I quite liked. But you're right, it's quite a dull film throughout. It did pick up in the last half hour. It's just a shame. It's a bit of a slog to get there, but
Yeah, I will say also, I didn't like the character of Cyrus laughing. For some reason, I found that quite irritating. Just because it's, you know, I mean, somebody could argue against me and say, well, you know, Leatherface is very over the top. Yes, but I found Leatherface quite disturbing. Whereas Cyrus, it just sort of made me laugh, you know, just a bit goofy. I think in a film that's otherwise again trying to play it quite straight. And both of these movies really are sort of quite devoid of humour, really, aren't they? They're trying to play it quite, you know, quite straight and quite dark. And I think Midnight succeeds more in that goal than Invasion of the Blood Farmers does. And I said at the beginning, you know, that it's not much better. I mean, obviously it is in filmmaking terms, it is better. But if you ask me which one of the two I enjoyed the more, I can't quite believe I'm saying it, but it would be Invasion of the Blood Farmers, even though it's, you know, a much worse film. There's just something about it that keeps me hooked to it. This, on the other hand, I struggled through it a fair bit. The ending of it, though, you know, things get going a bit. Like I say, Bert turns up there at the end, tries to save his stepdaughter, fails because he gets stabbed to death by Cynthia with one... I always find it funny in some horror movies how some people just die like almost immediately from something that probably wouldn't kill them immediately. Yeah. Like they stab him like once in the back and he falls over dead, you know, within 10 seconds. It's interesting here. At the end of it, it looks to me like all of the family are dead. But as I'm going to tell you when we get into the trivia section here, that seems like that wasn't the case. What do you think of John Amplas in this?
I think he's quite good, you know. He's obviously got a bit better at the old acting game than he was in Martin. But I think, like I said at the time, his inexperience imbued Martin with a certain quality, which I think worked. In this, I think he's pretty good as the nasty kind of brother in the family.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different role for him, isn't it? And of course, you know, some years later, he would end up playing a role as a scientist in Day of the Dead. Yeah. And, you know, again, a very different role for him. So at least he was trying different things, you know.
I don't think there's much more to say on this one. I think we've made our thoughts clear on it. You know, anything else for you?
Not really. You know, there's not a great deal to say about it. But I will say that I walked away from it, like I said, feeling a bit unimpressed by the whole thing. I'm glad though that you were able to, at least it's justified the purchase of it. Yeah. Because you had to buy this again for us. So at least that justifies. I mean, are you going to be keeping the copy this time?
No, I'll be straight back on eBay.
Straight back on eBay. Okay. So it didn't work. It didn't work that well. No. But yeah, I can understand that because I just can't see this as a film that you would sit down and watch for the purposes of entertainment, I suppose. That's one of my biggest problems with it. But it is. I'm glad you liked it a bit more than me anyway. For me, you know, a few bits that were okay, but I was bored through a lot of it. And yeah, not something that I was going to buy this, in fact, before Tom made the decision to. And I'm kind of glad I didn't because I don't really want to be lumbered with it, really.
I don't mind taking one for the team every now and again.
Yeah, now and again. I've still got a copy of Escape from Hell up there, the prison movie. So I haven't had a chance to sell it. I had to pay 15 quid for that, Tom. So yeah, you know. But overall, yeah, didn't really dig it. But I'm glad you did.
Good.
Well, let me get into some trivia on this one, Tom. I'm sure you're dying to know.
Can't wait.
I already said this earlier anyway, but John A. Russo is most famous for having co-written 1968's Night of the Living Dead alongside George A. Romero. Russo would later take advantage. Now, here is where we get to some of the things that I find most despicable about Russo. He would later take advantage of the film's public domain status by working on the much criticised 30th anniversary edition of that film, where he filmed all new sequences and included new story elements and music, inserting these into the original film. These sequences were heavily criticised for their bad acting, how they ruined the continuity and feel of the original classic. Russo has gone on to be involved in several Living Dead related movies, cashing in on the beloved nature of the film. I believe he also had a story credit on Return of the Living Dead, which is another good thing that he was involved with. If you actually look at his IMDb page, a lot of the stuff that he's doing now is all Living Dead related. Now that doesn't mean that it has anything to do with any of Romero's movies. They're just return. There was something on there. It was like something to do with the Living Dead. There's a couple of zombie movies on, so obviously he's cashing in on that reputation. Have you ever seen that version of the film, Tom?
I haven't. It is quite famous.
It's bad.
I would watch it out of curiosity. I just don't want to buy it. It needs to land on my lap. Sometimes you have to see these things for yourself.
No, it's really bad. I mean, I remember I got a very early DVD set that had the original Night of the Living Dead. No, sorry, it didn't have the original Night of the Living Dead. It had the 30th anniversary edition. It had Dawn of the Dead in it. And, the 30th anniversary edition was a huge mistake. And this is one of the problems I have with Russo, is that he does I don't think he has a tremendous amount of respect for these films, that he's just sort of cashing in on them. But that version, avoid it like the plague. It's just as bad as the colorized versions of the original as well. It's just taking a classic work and spoiling it, basically.
He is always quite criticised for that aspect. He's one of those guys, he's had a hand in something classic down the years, and then, it's like Kevin McClory with the Bond franchise. Quite rightly, he created some of the stuff within it, but he's always tried to play on that over the years, up until his death. And I think Russo's the same, trying to create his own. I mean, in a way, it's brought us Return of the Living Dead, but that was quite different from what he intended it to be, thankfully, if this is, the caliber he's working at. So, yeah, he's always been quite criticised because of that. And anything he has got made has always been a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is going to sound very spiteful to say it this way, but George Romero went on to do Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and Creepshow. And Russo went on to do Midnight. So, and a lot of really, really bad movies. Midnight's probably the best of them, really. But so Midnight was based on Russo's own novel of the same name, which was released in 1980 and then re-released in 82 to coincide with the debut of the film. Again, I've only sort of read reviews of the book from other people on the net, and they seem to be general consensus is it's not a very good book. A sequel to the film followed in 1993 entitled Midnight 2. This film was also written and directed by Russo, and it follows the only surviving member of the family, which is Abraham. It's played in the first film by John Amplas, and in this one by Matthew Jason Walsh, who films himself on a camcorder having sex with and then murdering women. Aside from the character of Abraham returning, the plot is otherwise unrelated to the first film. I mean, the last shot we see of Abraham in the original is him sort of open-eyed and open-mouthed, looking like he's dead. So it's sort of quite interesting to me that he, based on the sequel, he managed to survive what happened there.
How bizarre that is, though, that it even exists. If John Amplas had played him, then I could kind of say, all right, fair enough, but it wasn't even played by the same guy. Bizarre.
Yeah, I just get the sense that it was a bit of a cash-in, on that one. Russo attempted to fund a remake of Midnight via Kickstarter back in 2013. He set a goal of $50,000, though he failed to fund the film after achieving only $14,000. That's $14,000, not $40,000, of the amount he needed. Russo subsequently launched a successful Indiegogo campaign for his zombie comedy, My Uncle is a Zombie. Character actor Lawrence Tierney, Tom mentioned him earlier on, who plays Bert, Nancy's lecherous stepfather, had a long and fruitful career as an actor, appearing in over 101 films and TV episodes reaching as far back as the early 40s, according to IMDb. Tierney starred in a number of horror movies, including the 1981 slasher film The Prowler, which we'll be covering on Strange and Deadly very, very shortly indeed. From a Whisper to a Scream and House 3. He's perhaps best known to modern audiences, and Tom mentioned it before, as John Cabot, the man who helps put together the heist and gives the characters their colour-coded nicknames in Quentin Tarantino's 1992 classic Reservoir Dogs. And he's really great in that scene. I actually watched that earlier today. Just to sort of remind myself of it, and it's a really sort of commanding performance. And the funny thing about it is, Reservoir Dogs was over 10 years, I guess it was about 11 years after he starred in this, and he looks exactly the same. Yeah. He doesn't look to have aged at all.
Good. He's died now, hasn't he?
Unfortunately so, yeah, I think he died in about 2002, which is a shame. Finally, John Amplas, of course, I've said this before, really, I don't know why I'm reading it, but he plays Abraham here. One of the brothers in the family is, of course, best known for portraying Martin in Romero's film of the same name from 1977. So, the film was released on DVD in the UK by Arrow Video in 2011, and it's still available on Amazon in the UK. Lionsgate released a DVD in the US back in 2005, and that's also available on Amazon there in America. So, what was the print like on the Ammo disc? I imagine it's sort of reasonably good.
Yeah, it was fine. It was still very. I don't think you can get much from the source, to be honest. I'm no expert on these things, but it was perfectly watchable. It was fine.
Okay, great. So if you want a copy of that, you can find it, like I say, from Arrow Video here in the UK on DVD. And that is the end of the film review portion of the episode. And now it's time to read your feedback. Okay, so we've got an email from our old friend Rob Maloha, who's been very loyal to the show and is always sending us stuff lately. He says, "Aloha, Chris and Tom. You left a couple of censorship issues hanging last time, so between catching waves on... Now, what is this? Ho'okopa Beach? Ho'okopa Beach? What's he talking about, Tom?"
Is that in Wigan or something?
Okay, probably so, yeah, wherever he comes from. So he wants to clear up these censorship issues. He's getting very carried away with the Hawaiian theme, isn't he? Last House on the Left was rejected. Now, let me just say, this is in reference to our last episode where we talked about The Hills of Eyes and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Last House on the Left was rejected by the BBFC in 1974 and remained banned until 2002 when a cut version was passed. Various cut versions were released on DVD until it was finally passed uncut in 2008. The alternative Krug edit was also passed uncut in 2009. Is it Krug or Krug? I can't remember.
Can't remember.
That's what I was stumbling on there. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was rejected by the BBFC in 1975 and remained banned until 1999, although a few local councils who could override BBFC decisions allowed cinema screenings. James Furman, director of the BBFC from 1975 until 1999, seemed to have a personal vendetta against the film. I just want to say it's sort of interesting that I don't know if you keep up with the BBFC stuff, but once James Furman retired, they seem to really loosen their grip.
Definitely.
And have become much more, I hate what the BBFC did for a very long time, but they've actually become more of just a source of good information about films now than they have, sort of this horrible sort of censorship company. So James Furman directed the BBC from 1975 until 1989. Yeah, I've read all that. At a London Film Festival, screening to members of the British Film Institute, he famously and controversially stood up after the film and said, "It's all right for you middle-class cineasts to see this film, but what would happen if a factory worker in Manchester happened to see it?" It's no coincidence. It's no coincidence that Chainsaw was passed uncut for cinema and DVD release the same year that Furman retired from the BBFC. What a wanker!
It's quite interesting that second video in Nasty's documentary focuses on him quite a lot. I'm sure he was it's a difficult one, isn't it? I'm sure in day-to-day life he was a nice guy, a fine guy, but just very misguided in his views of things, obviously completely at odds to what we think about most things.
Absolutely, they have, but it's been interesting to see since he sort of left that chair there and retired. It's been interesting to see how much better the BBC has gotten.
Yeah.
So, thanks for that. Right, on to this week's offerings, which saw a definite drop in quality. You're not wrong about that. Last time I watched Midnight, it was with a few friends, and I can't say they were impressed. I wasn't allowed to pick films for a while after that. I watched it alone this time, and without the pressure of worrying what other people thought about it, found it okay. Exactly. The acting is pretty dubious in places, the song they keep playing is just wrong, and the film owes a debt to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's also very hard to tell that the kids from the opening scene are actually the Satanist family in the past. In an interview on the Arrow DVD with director John Russo, he blames this on Tom Savini for making the mummified mum look too unlike the original actress, meaning the audience didn't recognise her. He also moans that a lot of the takes were ruined due to bad film stock and had to be left out of the film, but I can't imagine they'd have helped much. This is the problem with John Russo, he just moans about things. On the plus side, Lawrence Cherney is pretty creepy in the early scenes, and it's always good to see John Amplas, although he seemed to be half asleep or drunk, which Russo confirmed in the interview. How funny. I thought the scene where the two guys were killed by the camper van was pretty good too. Maybe okay is a bit generous, but then again, in comparison to Invasion of the Blood Farmers, okay seems fair. People say that Plan 9 from Outer Space is the worst film ever made, but Invasion of the Blood Farmers gives it a run for its money. The acting was laughable, particularly Dr. Anderson and Sontag, they had me in stitches. Then there's the forward-thinking attitude towards women. Poor Jenny's only use was making coffee or breakfast for the men, even after her dog had just been killed. And once she'd finished being useful, they'd send her to bed. Then you get the couple on their honeymoon where the bloke just dismisses his new wife as some kind of sex-crazed fiend and sods off to the shower on his own. Being bludgeoned to death was a lucky escape for her. Although Terrible Blood Farmers is one of those so bad it's good films and really has to be seen to be believed. Right, I'm off to the luau, but I'm looking forward to the zombie feast you're offering up for the next 2 shows. You're wrong about that. Wrong about that one, Rob, but we'll tell you why in a minute. Cheers, Rob, at Rob's Lib. We didn't actually mention that scene. I found that scene quite charming and funny.
The newlyweds.
Yeah, the newlyweds in the hotel room, because I mean the thing is, he did just bugger off to leave her on her own. He went to go and have a bit of a wash, get ready for the
give it a rinse.
Yeah, give everything, give it a good wipe down, and get ready for some stuff. And I found that scene to be, if the most playful scene in a movie that takes itself very, very seriously.
It's always good to hear from you, Rob, and thanks for doing your homework on those films. It's good that someone is. But yeah, it was good to actually know about Texas Chainsaw and Last House and so on.
Yeah, because last week we didn't know at all if it had been banned, or we just weren't quite sure. I thought it had been, and he confirmed that. And that's it. That's all the feedback we've got this week, folks. I guess these films were a little bit too obscure for everybody. So, that's all the feedback that's been sent in to us directly anyway. Tom, I believe you have something there that you want to bring up.
Yeah. There was a bit of discussion between a listener to the show for a while and a gentleman by the name of Robert, and he has made some very kind comments about us on Facebook, saying, we're one of the top 5 genre shows, podcast shows, and he enjoys the show a lot. So I appreciate that. And he also gave some feedback on our last episode because his opinion differed quite a bit from ours. So I said I would read it out, and he says, "My feedback, such as it is, I would like to confine to these 3 main talking points where my opinion regarding Hills differed most significantly from yours. The depiction of the cannibal family. In your commentaries, you expressed a certain dissatisfaction with the look of the family. In defense of the film's aesthetics, I would argue that one must consider that the family was forced to either clothe itself in what it could trade with Fred, or what it presumably was taken off the corpses of those they killed. As for the acting, I felt, all things considered, that it wasn't bad at all, and certainly no more over the top than St. Niels Turner as the hitchhiker in TCM. Lance Gordon as Mars I felt was particularly effective, as was Berryman's Pluto, both of whom I thought really distinguished themselves in terms of on-screen menace and ferocity during the trailer invasion scene. 2. Hills is not a horror film. Like Last House Before It, Hills is not what I would classify as a horror film. If you will consider my definition of horror as the emotional response to any situation that defies the generally accepted laws governing reality, then what cinematically transpires during Hills, although harrowing, does not constitute true horror, in that nothing that's taking place here is occurring out of the boundaries of the humanly possible. Perhaps this is also much pedantic nitpicking, but I believe it's an important enough point, semantics-wise, to warrant further thematic investigation. Hills is not a backwoods exploitation film either, maybe even a more pedantic bit of semantic nitpicking than my previous points, but I do not believe Hills should be classified as exploitation either. Rather, it should more correctly be classified as man versus nature, unlike the murderous-minded backwoods degenerates of films like Deliverance, Southern Comfort of Straw Dogs. The Hills family is more a force of nature, more correctly an anthropomorphized version of the stark and inhospitable desert itself. This interpretation seems to me at least to have been intended by Craven through the use of character names Jupiter, Mars and Pluto, which we're assuming he's using here to convey the idea that the Carter family is at the mercy not only of the elements, but of a vaster and decidedly more hostile planetary cosmic influence as well. There is also another way in which you can view the film, and that's as a sort of veiled Jungian metaphor about facing shadows. Here the shadow is cast by the Carter family in the form of the Jupiter clan. which they must overcome in order to evolve past the stultifying stasis of their suburban existence. Again, the choice of the names of Mars and Pluto, war and violence, death, radical change, for the antagonists certainly point to a, if not overtly Jungian, then at the very least a mythic interpretation. This given that the remnants of the Carter family, if they are to survive, must descend into the underworld of violence and death if they are to surface again into the light of the consciousness. Anyway, those, for what they're worth, are my thoughts on the matter. Now, I got into a little discussion with Robert on Facebook about this, and he posted that, perfect way to start the week, thank you, when I posted the episode on there. But then he put, sorry, tried to get with this episode, but couldn't do it. And I said, how so? How's it different from any other episode? And he said, it's sort of a pet peeve, but I just find it hard listening when there isn't that much enthusiasm evidenced for the subject matter. And I think, that's what's led us to have a bit more of a discussion. And he's posted his thoughts on Hills Have Eyes, which, great. I think we've always been open to feedback, and that's the very reason we want to hear what you think. We've never said we're authorities on these things. We're going through this list ourselves and seeing what we think of stuff. By its very nature, we're not going to like some of them. And I know The Hills Have Eyes is considered as somewhat of a classic. And in one of his comments, I think Robert says something along the lines of, it's better than you give it credit for. But I think that's the key. Who decides on that credit? It's all, we credit things ourselves. I don't take received wisdom as part of my decision-making process as to whether I like a film. With me, it is down to gut feeling, and I do try and verbalize it on the podcast because we're trying to do an entertaining show, so I try and bring that out. But I just don't think there are any sacred cows in film. One man's classic is another man's not classic, for want of a better word. And I think in this case, The Hills Have Eyes just didn't really do anything for me. And while I take your comments on board, and thanks for sending them in, it still doesn't change my opinion of the film. But I do enjoy hearing other people's comments like yours on them. But unfortunately, like I say, what it comes down to is, who decides that credit? Well, we all decide it for ourselves, and I can only put on the podcast what I think.
Well, look, I'm not going to be as nice as you about it, Tom. First of all, I thank him for sending those comments in, or certainly writing them. Very well written, very well argued. The problem here is that it's the classic example of, I'll liken it to somebody going to see a comedian at a comedy show and laughing at all the offensive things the comedian says until that comedian happens to mention something that personally affects them in some way, whether it's a disability or maybe they're talking about child abuse or something that comedians tend to cover that is very offensive. They've laughed at everything else. They've laughed at the guy making fun of the fat woman that's over there, or the guy over there who looks a bit weird. But then as soon as they have mentioned that they've said something that is personally offensive to them, all of a sudden they have to jump in. Now, what was the name of the guy? Robert?
Yeah.
2 shows in a row now, Robert has criticised our enthusiasm for doing the show. And my feeling on this, and certainly some of that is backed up by the things that he said, is because we now happen to have talked about a couple of films that he likes, and because we've not reviewed the films in the way that he would want us to, now we're subject to this criticism from this guy. So let me answer it in the simplest way I can. It is my choice as to whether I choose to give credit to a film or not. That's not your choice, that's my choice, because you're a different person to me. And that's okay. That is really okay. It's okay for me to feel differently about a film that you like, because me not liking it doesn't take that away from you. Never has, never will do. I saw that he left another comment on there basically saying, well, he doesn't like it when films... when podcasters they tend to, put a film down, they tend to tear it apart or whatever. Well, I'm sorry, but if you don't like that, then don't listen to a podcast, or find one where everybody on the podcast happens to agree with you. Good luck with that, because that is damn difficult, because everybody has their own opinion. At the end of the day, I'm not going to sit here and dampen down my opinions just because you get upset by it, or because you know I'm offending your sensitive sensibilities. Not going to happen. Never ever going to happen. Not for me. This is not an academic film podcast. All the things that you said in there are really, really well written. It's not an academic film podcast. We're not film academics or professors. We're two mates sitting down and talking about films from a list, from the Section 3 list. That's all we do. It's all it's ever been about, is you listening into a conversation between two mates. Okay, it's not for us to get all the facts right. Now, I've always said, if you have legitimate criticism, we've got something factually incorrect, we've said something that's really offensive, then by all means, you know, or if you've got an opinion that just happens to differ. But actually sitting there and criticising our enthusiasm and criticising the way we covered the film because we didn't cover it exactly the way you wanted us to cover it, or the way we didn't speak about the film the way you wanted it to be heard, that's not our problem, that's your problem. So I can put it very, very simply. I'm glad you enjoy the show. If you choose to stop listening after you've heard what I have to say, that's up to you. I don't want to lose any listening to the show if I can help it. But, you know, time and again, I take time out of looking after my ill father to come and do this show. So don't question my enthusiasm. Don't ever question my enthusiasm. Believe me, we had a massive break, and I've had a couple of massive breaks, unfortunately, due to things that have happened in our lives, in our personal lives, and we've continually come back to this show for the fans. That's what we do it for. That's enthusiasm. Just because we didn't like a film that you like doesn't mean we don't have enthusiasm for doing it. If you're going to keep saying that every week, go and listen to something else. It's that simple, because obviously the show is not for you. Otherwise, stick with us, deal with our opinions. If you happen to disagree, that's fine. Don't criticise us because we didn't review a film the way you wanted us to. So that's that. I've had my say on that. Whether the guy chooses to agree or not, whether he gets upset, what can you do? At the end of the day, you know, life has to go on, and we're going to do the best we can with these. But we are two mates sitting and talking about movies. That's it. You know, we don't try to intellectualise everything. We really don't. There's no exact science to this. I may contradict myself up and down all day. What can I do about it? This is not my job. It's not my career. It just is two horror fanboys talking about films. That's what it is. Now, I just want to say before I give it back to Tom there, who's very silent in the background, I just wanted to make it very clear that I don't have anything to do with the Facebook stuff. The only thing I have is I have my own Twitter account and an Instagram, and then there's a Strange and Deadly Twitter account, which I sometimes post on if we're needing feedback or something like that. All the Facebook stuff is handled by Tom, and I think Chris Brown now and again has posted on there, but that's not me. I want to make it very clear that if I was on Facebook, I mean, I don't have a Facebook account, I don't like Facebook. If I had a Facebook account, I'd probably be on there kicking off about it, so it's probably best that I don't. I just wanted to make it clear that I don't have anything to do with Facebook. If I hear about any feedback on it, it's because Tom has told me. So I just wanted to make that very clear. And Tom, I'm going to throw it back to you now.
The unfortunate thing is, like you said, we're just two mates talking about films, and there have been times in the past when we've been talking about films on this, and I've sounded like, oh, I can't be arsed with this. And that you know, that's part of the reason why we took a break, because I was just so incredibly busy work-wise that if you're working 7 days a week, which I have been, and you get a few hours to yourself to do something, and you have to watch fucking the erotic rites of Frankenstein during those those few hours that you have to yourself, you know, I have come on here and been like, I can't even be asked talking about this because it's fucking awful, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things Robert's commented in the past, you know, what's the point in reviewing films you can't be bothered with? So the two of us saw that, and we were both a bit like, right, okay. You know, and I actually said to Chris, you know what, then maybe we should take a bit of a break, because I don't want anyone's listening enjoyment of the show to be compromised because I'm so tired that when I have to watch a piece of shit, I'm sitting here fucking grumbling about it. Which was part of the reason why we took a bit of a break, so that when we came back, we were more refreshed. And it's still hard fitting it in sometimes, but I actually came to The Hills Have Eyes because I'd seen it years ago and not really liked it, and thought, you know what, I'm quite looking forward to seeing this again and seeing if my opinions changed, which it had changed. They had grown in my estimation, and I said I thought it was okay.
Yeah, if I remember rightly, we both, our opinions of it, I actually liked it more than I did the first time I saw it. But he's upset because we've not explored all the themes and the things that he thinks about it. But that's not our job. My job isn't to read somebody's mind or to look at every single aspect of the film. My job is to talk about a film with my friend, and we do it in a somewhat casual way. And the fact of the matter is, we put a lot of work into this, both of us. I edit the show one week, Tom edits the show the next. We put hours and hours and hours into the edit. I put hours into the notes for the show. Believe me, nothing about this lacks enthusiasm. If we were lacking enthusiasm, we wouldn't do it at all, because we don't get any money for doing it. You can't really make a career doing it. So it has to be done for passion. And so, just because an internet pedant is getting upset and, posting comments about our enthusiasm and pointing out all these different things that we got wrong, and then at the same time is then paying us a compliment, I'm not sure that is, I'm a bit angry about it than you are, Tom, because I feel that it like I said, legitimate criticism and a different opinion, or if we said something offensive, it's totally fine. That's expected. I love hearing other points of view, and I enjoyed reading a lot of what Robert said. But this is, to me, is an example of somebody who is just very upset that we didn't talk about a film in exactly the way he wanted it to, or that we didn't like it as much as him. Tough luck, innit, mate? At the end of the day, you're going to have a very hard time in life if you're not prepared to accept that other people have different points of view than you do. There's so many films up on my shelf, Tom, that I love that other people talk crap about. What can you do about it? I'm not going to write a fucking essay about it, am I? It just is what it is. Anyway, I'm going off on one again, Tom, so, take us out here.
It feels like we've kind of soured this episode of the Strange and Deadly show slightly, but I feel like we had to address it in some way, because it felt like it was maybe a bit against the spirit of the show, which, like Chris says, is just two mates having a chat. And Robert is generally very positive about the show, and we've got great community sort of building up around it. People like Gore Blimey and Rob Maloha over in Hawaii and stuff like that. So we come to this with such goodwill.
Over in Hawaii.
We come to it with such goodwill that we have had criticism in the past, and you've wanted to say stuff, and I've said, Chris, just leave it, And I think from now on, that might be our stance. If people don't like the show, that's fine. No one likes everything. But we do it with such goodwill that I just felt it was slightly not in keeping with the spirit of the show, the way that had been put to us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the thing is, criticize us if you must, if we've done something that's wrong, but it's got to be meaningful criticism. It can't just be, oh, I'm a bit upset really because you didn't like a film I like. Well, that's tough, isn't it? At the end of the day, that is just tough shit. If we didn't, you have to get over it. You can't be so sensitive that listening to somebody tearing something apart on a show gets to you. Otherwise, you're going to have to listen to a show that's actually quite boring, because the people aren't going to be bothered to be animated about the things they're discussing. They just think everything is great. Well, everything isn't great, And the fact is, people like Gore Blimey and Rob Maloha, yes, they have, Gore Blimey is a big fan of, bloody hell, I can't remember the name of it now. What's the
zombie one?
Zombie Lake. Is a big fan of Zombie Lake. He knows I hate it. I hate it. Has never said that I'm wrong for hating it. In the same with Rob. Rob really liked GBH. And knows that I doesn't. Never came to me and said, well, actually, Chris, you kind of got all these things wrong because you should have looked at this and looked at this. I don't have to look at any of it. I'm not a film academic or professor. I look at what I want to look at. I have the opinion that I have, and the same for Tom, and it's just that simple. And that's all I have to say about it, really. At the end of the day, if you want to, it is difficult when you put hours and hours into a show, and the first thing you heard is, had to give up on this, lack of enthusiasm. No. That's just you getting offended because we didn't like a film you liked.
Okay, let's move on and talk about what we've got coming up next week, because we've rescheduled the movie list slightly, haven't we?
Yes. Yes, we have. We were originally going to cover a couple of zombie movies on the next one, and I felt that it was a little bit too close to the last zombie episode we did. Even though it's probably been quite a while, but I just mean in terms of the timeline of the show. So we swapped in a couple of other episodes from further up in the schedule, and we've punted the zombie episodes down a little further now, so you have to wait a bit longer for those. But the next two episodes have exactly the same theme on them, and that's why I've listed them here in our notes, because we can mention both of the episodes that are coming up, the next two, which we don't normally do. Normally we only mention the next one, but tell the folks at home what the theme of the next two episodes is going to be and what the films are that we'll be covering.
Okay, it's we're having a bit of a slasher month. So the next two episodes, providing they are within the space of a month, we don't promise anything these days, but we'll do our best. We are going with, again, we're doing a bit more of a obscure episode and a less obscure episode. So in the first one, we're going with two slashers called Home Sweet Home and Honeymoon Horror. And then the one after that, we are going with Prom Night and Rosemary's Killer, which is the original British title, I believe, but it's more well known as The Prowler. So two episodes devoted to slashers, and you're going to see this more as we work down the list, that we have kind of theme months, not just theme episodes, but theme months, because it throws up some interesting stuff, which I think this sort of rural one did. But Home Sweet Home and Honeymoon Horror, bit obscure, so hopefully you'll be able to find them. Hopefully we'll be able to find them.
Yeah, and then the episode after that, as Tom said, Prom Night and Rosemary's Killer, aka The Prowler, which I think are much easier to find. In fact, I own them both, actually. And I don't think I've seen the two that we're going to be covering on the next one, Home Sweet Home, Honeymoon Horror, so that'll be interesting. So yeah, next two episodes are going to be slasher themed, and if we've got any listeners left at the end of this, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and I apologise if it was sad for you a bit at the end, but hey, passion's going to carry you a long way in life, and I won't let people attack a show that I'm proud to be doing with my good friend Tom Elliott.
Thank you. Okay, so if you want to send feedback into those shows, you can send an email to feedback@strangeanddeadly.com. You can comment to us on Twitter, which is @strangedeadly. And we've also got the Facebook page, if you dare to post on it. And also, that's the Gentleman's Grindhouse Records Facebook page, just generic for all our podcasts, that one. And we've also both got Twitter accounts, and yours is?
Mine is @TheGoreBoy.
And I'm Grindhouse Tom, but I don't really...
And I'm also on Instagram, by the way, Tom. I always forget to mention it. I'm on Instagram /TheChrisClayton. So if you want to go on there and look at I post photos of stuff I've bought, and I've got a bunch of releases coming soon. You'll be able to see pictures of some horror stuff I got. So you can find us there.
Okay, well, we're going to get out of here, and we will see you next time for Home Sweet Home and Honeymoon Horror. See you later.
Bye for now.